Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's coverage of General Election 2024. My name is Debbie Ingram. This program is part of a series of candidate forums hosted by Town Meeting TV in advance of the general election on Tuesday, November 5th of this year. These forums are made possible by Town Meeting TV's generous underwriting partners. You can find all our forums at cctv.org/general or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel, where auto-generated captions are available. If you're tuning in on YouTube, be sure to click the subscribe button to stay tuned into local democracy this election season. On tonight's program, we will hear from 5 of the 6 candidates running for the Chittenden Southeast Senate District, which has 3 seats. Those candidates are, first sitting next to me is Virginia Ginny Lyons, who is an incumbent Democrat. Then Kesha Ram Hinsdale, who is an incumbent Democrat. Colonel Bruce Roy, who is a challenger from the Republican Party. Next is Taylor Craven, an independent candidate. And finally is Senator Thomas Chittenden, an incumbent from the Democratic Party. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
And we have prepared a list of questions for each one of you, and you will have 90 seconds to answer each question. Rebuttals will only be allowed if a candidate is named directly, in which case the candidate will have 30 seconds to respond. And folks, if you're tuning in live, we also welcome your questions, and you can dial the number on your screen, 802-862-3966. If you call in, we will do our best to prioritize your question, although we will screen calls to ensure that questions are not repeated. We ask that you share your name and the town you live in, and we ask that your question be directed at all candidates, not just one in particular. You can also submit questions for future forums online at cctv.org/general. So let's get started with our 1-minute opening statements. And so we'll do this alphabetically and start with Senator Chittenden. And so basically what we're asking you is to tell us why you're running and what experience qualifies you to serve as state senator.
Thank you very much, Debbie and CCTV, for having us tonight. These are important events for voters to hear from the people wanting to serve them in the State House. So our opening statement, I would just say a little bit about myself. I grew up in Chittenden County in South Burlington. I graduated South Burlington High School and I went to the University of Vermont. That's a little bit about my background. I've spent 44 of my 47 years in Chittenden County, and I believe my experience on the South Burlington City Council for 8 years in the University of Vermont Faculty Senate, serving on the Green Mountain Transit Board of Commissioners, they all inform my lens on the role of policy governance and how to navigate difficult conversations in a productive manner. I also believe my lived experience growing up here in Vermont and going to school here while raising my 3 kids in Vermont grounds my lens and worldview with Vermont tradition and history. I'm running for re-election because I want to see Vermont adopt more policies that make it easier for current and future Vermonters to stay here, live here, work here, and thrive here. I want to see Vermont adopt policies that make it easier to build housing and businesses in Vermont, to create more shelter for everybody and more opportunity to improve individual and collective quality of life here in the Green Mountains. I think that's about 60 seconds, so I'll stop there.
It is very close, 59. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on then to Taylor Craven.
Hi, my name is Taylor Craven. I come from a civil engineering and contracting background. I bring my common sense and fiscal responsibility to the legislature. I've lived in Vermont nearly my entire life and traveled to 48 states in the nation and multiple countries. There's no place I'd rather develop my roots than Vermont. Vermont has been traditionally bipartisan, but it seems to have taken a hard shift to the left. We need more political balance in the legislature so that proper checks and balances and compromise is met when crafting legislation. I've worked in every corner of the state. I helped to build hydraulic models after Hurricane Irene to rebuild bridges. I've worked in multiple municipal infrastructure projects, some of the biggest in Vermont, from the infrastructure improvement project in St. Johnsbury and Barry North Main Street, downtown Manchester, Creek Road in Middlebury, and most recently, Brandon Segment 6. I've worked with town managers, zoning administrators, various state regulatory agencies, fire and plumbing inspectors, and I know where improvements and streamlining can take place.
Sorry, Mr. Craven, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we've gotten to a minute, but thank you so much for sharing with us. So next we'll move on to Kesha Ram Hinsdale.
Oh, thanks. We're using the H. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
It is a privilege to be here. I'm Senator Kesha Ram Hinsdale. I served 8 years in the House, and I'm seeking my third term in the State Senate. I feel a little less coherent than I try to be usually because I have a 5-week-old. And that is in addition to my 18-month-old toddler who's starting to run around everywhere. So this is my first venture out of the House generally, no pun intended. But I have served as the chair of the Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs Committee. And I think it's fair to say that not a lot of people with my background, lived experience, and perspective have chaired that committee before. I am the first woman even to chair the Senate Economic Development Committee, if you can believe that. And I think sitting at the head of the table when you have that different perspective is really valuable and important. We've done massive work ending single-family zoning and trying to create an economy that works for everyone.
Thank you very much. And so next we'll go to Ginny Lyons.
Thank you very much, Debbie. It's a real pleasure to be here. And Channel 17, very, very important for folks who are listening and for the voters to know that Channel 17 is bringing you, our legislative panel. I'm a former chair of the Williston Select Board. I have been on the school board, the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission Board, so work very much locally and understand the differences and the needs for each of the towns that I represent in Chittenden Southeast. I look forward to going back to the Senate. We're in a difficult time. We're losing 6 leaders in the Senate, including 5 chairs of committees. I can't emphasize enough how critical it will be to have experienced senators returning, looking at our health care, our housing, our roads and bridges, and all the things that are so critically important as we review the budget each year. So thank you for having us and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. And so finally we'll go to Colonel Bruce Roy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Bruce Roy. I grew up in Vermont, graduating from Essex Junction High School and the University of Vermont, and having 2 successful careers, one at IBM and one at the Vermont Air National Guard. I am proudly endorsed by Governor Phil Scott, who encourages Chittenden County voters to send me to the Senate to help build a stronger and more affordable Vermont. If you're worried about how you're going to pay your taxes, how to pay your health care premiums, and even how to heat your home this winter, let's get a voice heard and pull up a new seat to the legislative table. Montpelier has ignored our concerns and issues for way too long. Unlike our current state legislature, who created this mess, I bring new ideas from my 30-year business, engineering, and management careers. I know how to pull teams together, listen to options, get to the facts, and solve complex problems. I'm committed to not only making sure you can live in Vermont, but thrive in Vermont as well. Our affordability crisis transcends political party. Vermonters, we are all in this together. We can fix it together.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so we'll move on to our first substantive specific question, and this is on property taxes and education. This year, many Vermonters will see a double-digit increase in their property taxes, and nearly a third of school budgets failed on town meeting day. How will you approach education funding reform and property taxes for the coming fiscal year? And so this time we'll start with Taylor Craven. Excuse me.
I think, as I alluded to in my opening statement, we need to consider some school consolidation throughout the state. In the 90s, we had 105,000 students, and now we're down to, as of 2022, 83,000. We have 300 schools in almost 100 school districts. And I think that we could shave some money from the budget by combining school districts and shaving a bit out of the administrative costs primarily. Obviously, one of the most prominent concerns with school mergers is having students have a longer drive to get to school. But I think that we could do it with an eye on school proximity and decide which are the most suitable for those types of mergers. We're a small state, we have a limited tax base, and the legislature needs to reconcile with that fact. That's going to involve some tough decision making, but 13.8% statewide tax increase is really unacceptable. I think it provides for a very tough situation for a lot of Vermonters, and many of those Vermonters aren't doing as well as maybe some of our median income statistics would show. So that's where I think is the most important to start.
Great, thank you. Now, Senator Hinsdale.
Yeah, so I've served on House Ways and Means and Senate Finance, so I suppose I'm also one of the people you could blame for the situation that we're in, but I've also seen a lot of our efforts to try and create more cooperation and collaboration and cost savings in our school districts. And I hope we can convey to Vermonters that we only have a few levers in order to focus on our property taxes and bring that rate down. One is trying to cut spending, and most of us don't want to shortchange our actual districts, and we want to look at ways to help encourage them to work together more. I think that's going to need to be done through investment in school construction aid, as well as through helping communities where maybe a school is no longer relevant or appropriate to turn that old campus into housing or childcare or a community center so they don't have a hole in their community. The other way we do this is growing the grand list, and so that's why I've been working really hard on our housing crisis and making sure that we have the population and just the people and taxpayers we need to grow. The other way that we do that is playing with the levers that are internal to the rate of the property tax. And we're going to start talking about taxes, and I just want to say, I authored one of what I think is the most progressive taxes this past session, which was a second home tax in the property transfer. That's not a property tax, but we should be looking at having a differential rate if you're not a Vermonter in the property tax.
Thank you. So, Senator Lyons.
Thank you very much. Obviously, we've had this discussion in the Senate as well as in the House. And my experience has been that we all bring terrific ideas to the table. And we currently have two groups working on this issue. One is on the Commission for the Future of Education that will be looking at the funding issues. We also have more structural working group looking at some of the issues around regional contracts or regionalization of administration for our schools, and some of the structural changes that may be very profitable to us in saving taxpayer dollars. But all of these ideas need to be evaluated for their cost effectiveness. We can't simply put them in place without having the grassroots discussion, the local discussion. A report came out today. It's called an evidence-based report on looking at school funding. It's a report by a consultant. And one of the things the report says is we could save between $400 and $460 million and spend, instead of $16,000 on average per student, $12,000 on average per student. That in and of itself suggests that there's savings. Folks are concerned about that report because it's a model. It isn't a full evaluation of who and what we are. So I'm looking forward to the work that's going on, and I'm looking forward to working with folks once I get back to the Senate.
Thank you. So, Colonel Roy.
Sure, thank you. Waiting for another study is not sufficient. Be assured another tax hike is coming next year. Whether it's as big as the one this year or not, I'm not sure, but it's going to come. I'm a less government, more local control advocate. So what I would suggest is that we do a better job tying the district spending to the local tax rates. And I think we can do that. I think we can set up a system where we can satisfy what's going on with the Brigham ruling by using non-property, non-homestead taxes funding going into the state. The resulting supplements that need to be done to fund the budget, I think, can be controlled and spent and voted on at a town level. I think we can do that. One of the things that I did early in my early in my campaign was to go out to the school districts and ask each one of them to do the impossible for me. Tell me what would happen if we had a flat budget year to year. And to a town, even with a flat budget, our taxes would go up anywhere up to 10%. For example, Shelburne, 16%, but it would have been with the budgets the way they are, it would have been 10% with a flat budget. The state has a constitutional obligation to provide public education, but I would present to you that we have a way of doing this where we as voters will have local control of our tax rates and our spending.
Thank you for that. And now lastly, Senator Chittenden.
Thank you. I want to recognize that there are many voters out there that have opened up their property tax bills and have been scared. They've been scared about the decisions they need to make in order to cover these expenses. And I want to say we need to do better. We need to find ways to lighten the burden on property taxpayers, to not drive people out of this state and have those really hard conversations around the kitchen table. I'm looking forward, if the voters let me go back, to tackling some things that we've asked for a study of. It's important to get consensus, to understand pros and cons, trade-offs of different things. Things that we do need to do, which I heard in multiple answers, is that we need fewer and newer schools. Vermont spends a lot on our kids and education, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, we are very mountainous rural terrain. It is more expensive to educate kids in mountain and rural terrains. It's also that Vermonters care about public education. They want high quality public school education available to kids, and they keep voting for budgets that align with those values. So with those two as accepted principles, we need to find ways to make it reasonable in ways that it doesn't all fall on the backs of our property tax owners, the Vermonters that stay here. I think some great ideas that I've also heard is about an excess spending threshold penalty on certain types of spending in order to drive more equity across schools. The Lieutenant Governor is speaking a lot about taking non-education expenses out of the Ed Fund, funding them through general ed sources that can also be then more controlled directly from the state, looking at spending transparency. I want to see a differential rate on non-owner occupied second homes so that we can collect from the right sources in order to make this more equitable to all those Vermonters struggling to pay their bills.
Thank you all for that important discussion. Now let's move on to another topic, emergency shelter. Vermont reported 3,295 people experiencing homelessness in 2023, which was up from 1,110 in 2020. This year, the state is rolling back its pandemic-era emergency shelter capacity across the state, pushing hundreds more Vermonters onto the streets. How will you approach the need for emergency shelter in the coming session, and how should the state pay for it? And this time we'll start with Senator Hinsdale.
Well, between my committee and Senator Lyons' committee, this is a question that we've been working on for some years and trying to collaborate, because generally my jurisdiction is trying to get more housing built, and Senator Lyons' committee works on what are the consequences when we don't have that housing available to people. I think what we have to recognize is that we don't have a lot of cooperation from the governor on this question. When we put money into the motels, what we'd like to have happen is that people who all need oxygen or have ambulatory issues are consolidated in the same place so they can get the care they need. Or, families are being given options for what happens next. What we've seen is, unfortunately, people tend to be warehoused in the motels and then just released when they run out of time. And it's not easy then to create a cost-effective solution when people have very different needs and are eligible for different programs. So barring having that partner, I think many of us have just advocated to keep the motels open while we have turned the spigot on more long-term housing options. A half a mile from me in Shelburne, 94 units of affordable housing are going in for families. We can wrap our arms around this problem, but we need more time to do it. And $36,000 a year for a unit of housing is the cheapest one we have. So we should be investing in that and working things out with our motel owners for the foreseeable future. And I wish the governor would help us with that.
Okay, thank you. So Senator Lyons, you're next.
Thank you for that. And as Senator Hinsdale has indicated, this is not a new problem. It's been ongoing for many, many years. One of the things that I think we need to realize is the effect that the pandemic had, not only for folks who became homeless, but also for the changes that we've seen now. ARPA, the funds that came from the federal government, really reinforced and boosted people's opportunities to stay in hotels. We don't have that funding left, but what we can do is to make a smooth transition so that folks who need to stay in a hotel, that is families with kids, the folks who have need for oxygen, chronic, most vulnerable Vermonters who need to be there, that we have provided within the budget process 80 days of time during the temperate weather. And now from December to April, we also have our severe weather program. We need to look at how we can transition that in a better way. And as housing is built, we need to prioritize. I spent a meeting a couple of weeks ago, Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, listening to the rules that came from the administration about how people will be placed into permanent housing, into temporary housing. There was no consideration for prioritizing people who absolutely need support. That's a concern to me, and it's something that we can correct.
Thank you for that response. So we'll turn now to Colonel Roy.
I read a recent letter to the editor from Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman the other day where he called homeless crisis a moral failure. And he blamed the problem on Governor Scott. That couldn't be further from the truth. Indeed, we do have a moral obligation to help the homeless, and we will. Vermonters will do that. I'm confident the governor, the legislature, and nonprofits will make sure the homeless will be kept fed and warm through the upcoming winter. Vermonters are caring, compassionate people, and we will protect the most vulnerable. But the homelessness problem is really complex. It's rooted in other deeper issues. Mental illness, disabilities, poverty, addictions, affordable available housing are all part of the problem. The failure is not moral. The failure is that these issues have not been addressed, and they need to be addressed now. It's not going to be a short-term solution. There's none really there, but they do need to be addressed when you have to start working on it. In an $8.6 billion budget, we will find the money to keep people from freezing to death. But we need to stop and solve the real underlying problems.
Thank you. And next we'll go to Senator Chittenden.
Vermont needs more roofs. The more houses we have across the socioeconomic spectrum, the more roofs there are in the market. That allowing for more middle-class housing will free up multi-unit housing and affordable housing, and fluidity allows for capacity to be realized, including the repurposing of commercial properties. My heart goes out to all those experiencing homelessness, and I'm proud of the many support systems that Vermont does have that I heard others just speaking about. We've put in place paths to stable housing. We need to do more, and we need to align the incentives for these systems to be carefully considered to drive permanent life commitments for improved quality of lives. The General Assistance Program with the motels was not designed to be a permanent solution. To house 3,000 people in hotel rooms for $100 a night for 365 days a year would cost $109 million. Just doing the math. That's more than we spend on our judicial system and our state's attorney's office combined. There are much more economical long-term solutions to employ that we are taking, but they take time. And I'm confident that we are going to work with continued thoughtful administration of these services to keep all vulnerable Vermonters safe and warm.
Thank you. And so lastly, we'll go to Mr. Craven.
Thank you. The aim needs to be a multifaceted solution. We need to take a look at who's comprising this population in order to develop a more tailored and appropriate solution. According to census.gov, 25% of the sheltered population is no longer in the workforce. 15% are unemployed, 61% are no longer in the workforce, and 25% are either they're working a full-time job or a part-time job. What I'm getting at is that people who are able-bodied need to be able to work, and we should be coming up with a work program, something akin, I like the Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s. So you get people to work, you give them value, and they can lift themselves out of poverty. People who are, obviously you've got a very diverse population. You've got people who are dealing with drug addiction. You've got people who are dealing with different medical problems, and we need to give them the assistance that they need. But I think that in order to do that, you have to rebuild some other systems and increase systems such as our inpatient care, psychological services. You've got estimates that there's 25 to 2/3 of the homeless population is suffering from mental illness, and that is a part of the solution as well.
Great. Thank you all very much for those responses. Let's turn now to a related issue, that of housing. This past session, Democrats and progressives in the House proposed spending an additional $100 million per year for 10 years on publicly subsidized affordable housing. This level of investment was not passed in the Senate. Would you support this level of public investment in housing? And so we will begin with Senator Hinsdale.
Oh, again.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
I didn't know I was batting cleanup because I can talk about this topic forever.
No, that's okay. I beg your pardon. I did miss my little diacritical mark here. So it's Senator Lyons' turn to start first. Sorry.
Well, housing is so much intricately related to the question that we were talking about a minute ago on emergency housing. We are investing a significant amount of money into housing, and as Senator Chittenden has said and Senator Hinsdale has said, we need more homes, we need more permanent housing, and we are doing that. The Vermont Housing and Conservation Board will have millions of dollars to invest in new housing. Then we need to understand that some of that housing, or much of it, is going to have to be affordable long term. We can't continue to build homes that don't meet the needs for our middle income and our lower income citizens. So we do have programs in place for that. I will say that going forward, we do need to phase out the motel and hotel program, either through purchasing some of the motels and hotels, that's what we've done, but also the goal is permanent housing. I'd just like to remind folks that the people who are in our motel program are the working poor. Some of these people are working 2 and 3 jobs just to live. So how can they afford a mortgage, and how can they get out with the rent that is so high today? So the work that we are doing to invest $70 million, $100 million going forward is critical.
Thank you. So now we'll turn to Colonel Roy.
Vermont has been underbuilding homes and rental properties for a generation. Restrictive, expensive, confusing, and inconsistent regulations have been part of the problem. Expensive building costs and a shortage of workers in all construction trades certainly compound the problem. I think we need to address this under multiple fronts. Serious Act 250 reform with a predictable, simpler, and reasonable approach to protecting our environment, with one that the developers can work with and encourage them to build affordable housing. We need to lower the property tax burden on property owners, get property taxes under control to make buying a home more affordable to home buyers, and lowering ownership costs to landlords to pass that on to renters. We need to lower the income tax burden on taxpayers by making it more affordable to live in Vermont so we can keep our new and experienced tradespeople here. And this will not only provide a bigger pool of talent, but keep our tax base solid. And we also to provide an incentive for not only building just growth centers, but outlying areas as well. Cramming more people into denser population areas is not the answer. We need to spread. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Chittenden.
So one of the concerns I had with that bill was that Vermont just doesn't have the workforce to take on that level of state direct investment in what is traditionally done by private developers. I don't know about you all, but I had a heat pump installed. I had to wait 8 months to line up the workers to actually be able to install it. And similarly, I wanted to upgrade my electrical box in order to prepare for an EV, and that was about a 4 or 5 month advance notice. Our housing crisis doesn't have enough, doesn't allow for enough people to be able to build the homes that bill contemplated. But I also want to just state that our housing crisis is not unique to Vermont. This is happening nationwide, and it's a result of both regulatory constraints and underinvestment by the private and public sector. I agree with some of the comments just made by Colonel Roy that we do need to look more closely at regulations and how to open up and make it easier, more attractive, and more feasible to build. I would disagree on the density piece. I would argue that we need more density housing. Resources in a free market gravitate towards opportunity, which can be incented through regulatory policy or the relaxation of policy and identified demand. But these shifts take years to realign. I believe the conversation on housing has shifted over the last 4 years, both in Vermont and nationwide, and very positive progress has been made to send us on a better trajectory for the coming directory, in no small part because of the clear and effective leadership of Senator Ram Hinsdale on the Housing and General Affairs Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Craven.
This is not a sustainable way to tackle the public housing crisis. Burlington recently announced progress on an affordable housing unit project on the former VFW site. $22 million for 38 units. That's $578,000 per unit. That doesn't sound very sustainable, not unless Vermonters want to go bankrupt. The market is the only sustainable solution to the housing affordable crisis. The housing crisis will be solved through building more homes and finding ways to build them cheaper. Just look at the prior question. Since 2020, the homeless population has increased by 546 people per year. Even at $100 million, that's only 172 units per year. Not even a third of what we need. It won't be solved by wasting taxpayer money on overpaying for government-supervised development. You must look to the free market to solve these problems. We must incentivize developers to build residential housing over short-term and second homes. The solution to me is codifying permanent primary residential housing. Permanent in the sense that the units are constructed are permanently deed restricted to serve as someone's primary residence, where they receive mail or deliveries, and they place the place they associate with for the purpose of tax residency. These could be multifamily residential units, single-family homes, or any other type that serves the primary residential housing, not short-term rentals or second homes. Developers of PPRH should be incentivized. Tax breaks, streamlined inspections, waived permit fees, and other incentives should be implemented to encourage this type of development. With the proper incentive package, investors will be more inclined to choose this type of beneficial project as opposed to building more second homes and short-term rentals.
Thank you. And now, Senator Ram Hinsdale, you get to bat cleanup.
I'll try. This is where I should have taken notes because 90 seconds is not enough for me to talk about this topic. But I actually hope what people are hearing is that there's not a whole lot of disagreement between Democrats and Republicans on this topic because the national research consensus, where there's incredible data from every city in the country and what their regulatory framework is and what that's meant for housing, is that if you create more housing, more multifamily housing particularly, you lower cost of rent and you lower the rate of homelessness. That is absolutely not disagreed with. Pew Charitable Trust came to the State House and told us that themselves. And when you think about the consequences of that, then we have to think about what units are available in the state. The Appropriations Committee, frankly, is the committee that gets to decide what the best use of our dollars is overall. We are going to be looking at hospitals that are insolvent this coming session. We're going to be looking at the housing crisis. We're going to be looking at a school construction crisis and how we help our kids learn in a safe environment. And that's a hard conversation about where our dollars are best spent. My job as the chair of the Committee on Housing is to make sure that every dollar spent is spent well. And I can't say with any certainty that just throwing money at this problem is going to solve it. We spent $500 million, which is the amount proposed by this bill was $1 billion, and that would solve the crisis with the motels. We've spent $500 million over the course of the pandemic, and no one's been able to tell me that we solved half the problem of homelessness in the state. So we have to be good stewards of Vermonters' dollars, and that means regulatory reform, seeing where investments have gone, and getting this right before we simply say all of our new money would go to that issue. There are plenty of other issues that Vermonters are worried about.
Okay, thank you all very much. So we're going to switch gears now to a new topic, that of public safety and criminal justice. Public safety is a top priority for many voters in this election. This past session, lawmakers increased judicial staff, increased retail theft penalties, and expanded restorative justice practices in Vermont. What more needs to be done by the legislature to advance public safety and repair Vermont's criminal justice system? And so we'll start with Colonel Roy.
Okay, thanks. After hundreds of door-to-door visits and dozens of meet the candidates, and even going to the dump on Saturdays, where my wife likes to call it talking trash. After economic affordability, certainly public safety is the next most mentioned concern from Vermonters. And we all see what's going on in Burlington, and as it reaches into St. Albans and Brattleboro and Bennington, we're seeing what's going on. We have to support our law enforcement officers and provide them the resources they need and training necessary to protect and serve. That includes investments in clearing the backlog in our judicial system, more social workers to help support nonviolent crimes and interactions resulting from mental illnesses. We know that's a huge problem. And we need more restorative justice professionals to facilitate the process when it fits. And I've seen instances where it fits very, very well. And we need to spend more money in giving our police officers the ability to go that route. The catch and release policy, which is going on now, the low, no bond policy for those arrested, must be seriously reviewed. The policy, in conjunction with trial backlogs, sadly is not holding perpetrators accountable for their criminal actions. We need to focus on that. I know some work has been on that already. There's been some money for that, but it's sadly not enough. We're going to have to do some more sharpening of the pencil and get some more money to get rid of that backlog.
Thank you. So next we'll go to Senator Chittenden.
This country has the highest per capita incarceration rate of the whole world, and sending people to jail isn't rehabilitating them. Too often it's just reinforcing or expanding life choices, compounding the macro-societal criminal justice challenges. We need to continue reducing incarceration rates, but at the same time we do need to incarcerate habitual offenders with focused rehabilitation programs in our facilities. There needs to be consequence to unsafe behaviors in our communities, or lawlessness will prevail, which is not justice, it's injustice. I'd also like to see us invest in reentry programs designed as rehabilitation shelters with job training, addiction treatment, and mental health services. We already do some of that, more. We also need to address systemic racism in our criminal justice outcomes. BIPOC citizens have higher incarceration rates than their population proportion, which needs to be compensated for with more counter-racism approaches in our laws and policies. And we need to invest in our community policing systems. We need all of our honorable members of law enforcement to be well trained and prepared to provide 21st century policing that respects civil rights, our diverse society, and the challenges implicit biases still dominate in our society. This can be accomplished through improved use of force policies, body cameras, and policing practices focused on reducing unnecessary violence.
Thank you. Mr. Craven, your response.
I think the restorative justice approach sounds better in theory than the results show. According to 28 VSA 2A, offenders must apologize to victims, fulfill community service, and when relevant, successfully complete treatment addressing the offense or other underlying problematic behavior, or undertake academic or vocational training or other self-improving activity. So they must apologize, do community service, and then get training. That sounds a bit lacking in the punishment department. I highly doubt offenders are going to be issuing sincere apologies with deep contemplation of the wrongdoing that they've done. Honestly, this doesn't seem to be working out too well. When I see articles coming out recently in WCAX highlighting the cycle of catch and release for repeat offenders, in this article, in Vermont, any offense with a maximum prison term of more than 2 years to life that may be punished by death is a felony. Any other offense is a misdemeanor. This needs to change. Repeat offenders, especially violent offenders, must be held to account and prevented from terrorizing and deteriorating our communities. I would vote to broaden the definition of what constitutes a felony, and especially with respect to violent crime. I don't think anybody should be walking home from work at night scared to make it back to their vehicle and feeling like they need to have a buddy system to get home safely.
Thank you. Senator Ram Hinsdale.
Thank you. And, I can't look at this question without thinking of the great loss in the Senate of Senator Dick Sears. Many of us traveled down to Bennington, which he would have appreciated, for his funeral some months ago. And it was the first time many of us learned that he was actually born in a women's prison in Massachusetts, where his mother was incarcerated. And I'm probably going to spend a lot of time this session asking, what would Senator Sears do? And I say that because I don't think any of us are fully right about this. And I think the more we admit that and are willing to say, we tried this and it may not be working, or, I'm willing to hear you out, I think the better off we'll be in this conversation, because what we can't accept is treating people as disposable or irredeemable, but also recognizing that victims have rights and that, they really want to feel safe in our communities. So, we had a joint hearing, myself, because economic development has a lot to do with the safety of our downtowns. And what came out of that was a lot of the legislation you saw this year that we hope helps with this issue. But it is all of those committees coming together to say this is an economic issue, it's a human services issue, and it's a judicial access to justice issue. And the more we can create joint solutions, I think the better off we'll be, and we'll continue that work.
Thank you. And Senator Lyons.
Thank you. Ironically, tomorrow I will be at a joint Justice Oversight Committee meeting, which includes folks from Health and Welfare, Human Services, Judiciary Committees, Institutions Committees, looking at not only what we need to do or thinking about the issue that we're talking about right now. This is a Herculean task. There's no question that restorative justice is the right direction to go. It will help people re-enter into our communities. As an example, one of the things we face today is finding a new women's prison. Right now, we have a women's prison in South Burlington that is absolutely disgusting. It is inappropriate to hold people in that facility. And what we're looking at for a new facility is to have a transitional building, a place where folks can go as they're leaving prison to rehabilitate for a period of time and then go into the community. That's important, and we understand human needs when we think of these things. Beyond that, I'm working with the Supreme Court and the mental health and justice and the judicial mental health and judicial program. We're looking at competency to stand trial. We're considering issues around victims and what happens when folks who are incompetent to stand trial are either placed in the community, or should we have a secure facility for them. There are very complex discussions to be had around all of this. Restorative justice, justice reinvestment, that Senator Sears, as Senator Hinsdale has mentioned, was so important to our state. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Another related and important issue is the overdose crisis. 231 people died from an overdose in Vermont in 2023, with 95% of overdoses involving fentanyl. What must be done to prevent overdoses, promote addiction recovery, and deter the illegal sale of opioids in Vermont? And for this one, we'll start with Senator Chittenden.
We need more housing options with the supports necessary, including change of scenery for those suffering from the disease of addiction. We also need to better promote the Never Use Alone hotline so people are able to confidentially consult support professionals without judgment as they offer harm reduction strategies and drug use in real-time monitoring. I don't know if a lot of you know this, but for the last year and a half, we now have a mental health support crisis line, 988. It's not 911, it's 988. It's been online for about a year plus, maybe 2 years now, and I think we need to do more to make people aware of that support resource. 988, one thing that came up a year ago, and I'm looking forward, if the voters allow me to return to the Senate, to hear an update on this from the administrative professionals that said they were working on it. I was told by multiple professionals in the field that right now when people call 911, or a year ago when they would call 911 with a mental health issue, there was no technical or procedural capability to transfer over to these licensed mental health professionals on the 988 crisis line. We need that capability to be put in place. And I understand it's a new system, and so that's what we're working on, to be able to hand off those calls, because people know 911, we need them to also know 988. We also need to rethink prisons in this country to be rehabilitation shelters, giving people the time and space to align their life goals with life practices that can be demonstrated to be successful.
Thank you. Mr. Craven.
I think it should start with common sense regarding what's acceptable public behavior. After a recent drive up North Winooski Ave in Burlington, past the library, City Market, and the two churches past that, I was shocked at the extent of public drug use. When I was at the University of Vermont, People I knew were worried about getting caught smoking pot through their windows. And I knew some people who were caught from foot patrols. And I didn't agree with that, and I don't agree with that now. However, there's a major middle ground to be struck between pursuing marijuana users and openly injecting fentanyl, heroin, and other substances on the steps of public buildings, discarding publicly supplied needles onto the streets, and then being resuscitated by Narcan. This isn't sustainable. The middle ground is mandated treatment for people who are publicly injecting drugs. We cannot allow this behavior to run rampant in our communities. We cannot allow drug addicts to take over our libraries, our parks, and to feel comfortable in a drug stupor until they come to. I'm not content with the current state of affairs. It's unacceptable that some progressive policies have decriminalized this type of behavior. It's unacceptable that my friends in the restaurant industry now have to utilize a buddy system to get home at the end of a late night shift. If caught clearly on opioids in public or using them, those people should be put into mandated rehabilitation.
Thank you. Now we'll turn to Senator Ram Hinsdale.
Thank you. So I've spent a lot of time studying this question, believe it or not, not only because Vermont is having this issue, but because my sister overdosed when she was 14 years old and I was 10 years old. And I'm glad she's still with us. She's traveling India right now. She's, healthy and vibrant. And we lose too many people to overdoses. We never get them back. They never get that chance to be the person they could have become to realize their fullest potential. And one of the places, including Portugal and Kentucky, that I, looked at this issue was West Virginia, where they've had a very high overdose death rate. And their chief medical officer was really able to reduce the overdose death rate. He did it by about a third. And there were a few lessons there that stuck with me. One is he said something that I think a lot of doctors would recognize, which is we wanted to treat pain, but we couldn't treat suffering. A lot of people who get addicted have mental health issues. They may also not have good dental care. They may need a knee replacement and they're in chronic pain and they turn to opioids thinking that it'll give them some relief and get addicted because our healthcare system doesn't support them. Similar to what Senator Chittenden said, we should recognize that about 75% of people who die of overdoses sought help in the last week of their lives. So if that support isn't sticky, we lose those folks. And finally, I'll just say to Senator Lyons' work, there should be no wrong door. We spend too much time arguing about, is this solution right or is that solution right? They're all right for somebody, and we need to catch people wherever they are to prevent their death.
Thank you. So yes, now we'll turn to Senator Lyons.
Thank you. Let's all remember that addiction is not a choice, and ending addiction is difficult. So whatever we do, we need to have a system in place that catches and captures people when and where they need help. Whether it is walking into a physician's office or whether it is on the street and going into a recovery center or looking for support. We need to have the support system in place. And one of the things that we're working on right now, and we'll have a report coming out, I know some people don't like reports, but you know what? They honestly help and they provide information. So when we look at this report on recovery programs for the state of Vermont, we'll understand the system that we need to have in place. Right now we have a very disjointed system for recovery. If we can catch people when they need help and we can put them into a recovery center, not for 30 days, because they go in for 30 days, they come out, and they go through the revolving door for 30 more. We need to have support, Medicaid or other coverage for 90 days so that we can ensure that when people go in for help, there's sufficient time for them to understand and to work through their recovery. So I look forward to working on this issue. I've worked many, many years on this. I think one of the things we forget about is prevention and the investment in prevention that's so critical, particularly for kids. So we need to do that and make those investments so that we save a lot of money later on. So thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, we'll turn to Colonel Roy.
Okay. We have an extreme shortage in mental health services and providers in Vermont. You can ask yourself why, and I think it's because living in Vermont is unaffordable and getting worse, and the exodus of trained clinicians in all the medical fields must be stopped. We've got to focus on making living in Vermont an affordable thing for everyone. We can't afford to have our most trained and most proficient medical people leave. I was at an event a couple years ago talking to some medical students about what they were doing at UVM and where they were going to go, what they were going to do after they were done. And 3 out of the 3 I talked to were going to leave the state. We can't let that happen. We've got to make living in Vermont more affordable. I think the hub and spoke model that we have going on in Vermont is working. It's become a model for many other states. I've talked to several doctors and clinicians about this, and they do agree as well. I think we need to invest in more regional resources and programs, and further, even to a larger extent than we already are, and push for folks to get their support in their regions versus having to travel long distance for it. On the criminal side, we've got to guarantee harsh and immediate penalties for drug dealers and distributors. They prey on the vulnerable, and we can't allow that.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all. We've been tackling some very serious and serious issues, and you've given us some long, thoughtful answers. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of a break and ask for some short answers, short and rapid fire. So this we like to call our lightning round, and what we'll do is just start with Thomas Chittenden and then kind of go all the way around, so I don't have to ping pong around with you folks. So the idea here is to answer either a yes or no or less than 10 seconds. Okay,
Nice
so
out.
yes, please.
Good luck with that.
Please try to be disciplined about that, right? Okay, so we will. So I'll ask one, and we'll go through everybody and keep going. Okay, so very first one, Tom, is: should private schools be funded with public dollars?
No, but if there's no public school in that rural area, we need to be reasonable in allowing students to tuition to qualified independent schools, and there are special needs kids where tuitioning can make the most sense.
Okay, Taylor.
I don't see any problem with people exercising their freedom of choice of where they want to go to school and using whatever stipend they use for that public school to go to a Catholic school or a private school.
Bruce.
Yeah, school choice is important, and I think it's irresponsible that we would not provide funding for schools like Senator Chittenden just said, for St. John's, Barry Lyndon Academy, Lyndon Institute, Thetford and Burton. They provide a huge service to their areas.
Kesha.
Not generally, but there are exceptions.
Ginny.
Yes, similar to what both Senator Chittenden and Senator Hinsdale have said, as long as they're needed in that area and they meet state standards.
Okay, we'll start back with Thomas. Do you support raising the age of family court jurisdiction?
Yes, as part of an approach to reduce incarceration and to give kids another chance at redemption while keeping their youthful indiscretions from haunting them their entire life via Google searches.
Taylor.
No.
Bruce.
No.
Yes. Oh, sorry, you didn't call me.
That's
that,
fine,
but-
Kesha.
I was done.
There's one in every class.
Yes, for low-level crimes.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on then. Should biomass, burning wood, play a role in emissions reduction strategies? Thomas.
Yes.
Taylor.
No, absolutely not. It's a very sustainable and it's very cost effective for a lot of people to heat their homes.
Bruce.
I think the McNeil wood burning plant needs to be considered in all sort of that discussions.
Kesha.
Not in the long term.
Jenny.
Yes, but without expansion.
Okay. Next question. Do you support a statewide ban on assault weapons? Thomas.
Yes.
Taylor.
No.
Bruce.
I define an assault weapon as a fully automatic weapon, and no civilian needs that.
Kesha.
I'm so blown over by it. I can't remember. Yes, I support an assault weapon ban.
Thank you.
And I
Ginny.
appreciate that answer.
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. All right, next one. Should legislators be paid more? Thomas.
No.
Taylor.
No.
No, but I suggest a pay-for-performance plan for legislators. I think for every 1% that the legislature drops the budget, we can give them a 2% raise.
Okay, Kesha.
I would just like health care. And I think a lot of people believe we already get benefits as legislators, which we don't. And it's challenging.
Ginny.
Yes, I think some of the payment for out-of-session work is really important.
Okay, next one. Do you support banning or limiting student cell phone use in schools?
With three kids in public school, I need an hour to answer this question, but really quick, limiting, yes, but not banning outright. Cell phones exist in society, and we need to teach our kids on how to coexist with them while leveraging their capabilities.
Taylor.
I would support banning them. I think that they promote bullying in schools, and anything that we can do to mitigate that is really important.
Bruce.
Yeah, I support limiting them for non-classroom activities.
Kesha.
We're seeing early evidence that bans work, and I would likely support them.
Jenny.
Yes.
Okay. Next, where do you get your news? Thomas.
VT Digger, 7 Days, the other paper, the Shelburne Times, the Times Inc., the Charlotte News, the Heinsberg Citizen, the Mountain Gazette, WCAX, WPTZ, CNN, and of course, Channel 17.
I think you missed VPR.
VPR, Public, Vermont Public.
Taylor.
I'd say a variety of sources. I like to know what everybody else is thinking, and that means sort of perusing all the headlines that you see everywhere.
Bruce.
Yeah, same as Senator Chittenden, but I like to go into sources where I can go and validate where they got their data from.
Kesha.
I'm with a 1-month-old and an 18-month-old a lot, so it is a lot of Vermont Public.
The Cartoon Network.
And PBS Kids. But I really appreciate Digger's reporting, and all of our local journalism is critical to democracy.
Thanks. Jenny.
Yes, all of the above, Vermont Public, VT Digger, 7 Days, all of the other paper, all of our local news outlets, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, etc. It's very important to have a diversity and a lot of different folks.
Okay. Do you ride the bus, Thomas?
As much as possible, but not enough.
Taylor.
Not really. I live a little bit far out of town, and that would be a bit difficult, but every once in a while, and certainly when I go to more metropolitan areas.
Bruce.
No, I don't, but when I'm in Boston, I do take the T.
Kesha.
Not right now with my young kids, but I really hope we can tackle transportation as a major issue this session.
Jenny.
Not regularly.
Okay, and last but not least, what's your favorite ice cream in Vermont? Tom.
It's taken me years to admit it, but I'm a politician, so I have to go with maple creamies.
Taylor.
I'm pretty close. I'm a maple black raspberry twist with chocolate sprinkles.
Oh boy.
I'm kind of a pie guy, so key lime pie from Jericho Cafe and Tavern, and then any kind of apple pie coming out of Poorhouse in Underhill.
All right, Kesha.
That helps me because through pregnancy, I've had a hard time answering this question, but I'm an apple pie with cheddar cheese and vanilla ice cream kind of gal, and I love Wilcox.
Oh, Wilcox is good.
Wilcox.
And Jenny.
Vanilla caramel fudge by Ben & Jerry's.
All right, great. Well, thank you all for being good sports and for answering that lightning round of questions. So I'm going to shift gears again and go back to a more serious topic. One I think that is on the hearts and minds, especially of a lot of our young people, is that of climate change. So 2025 is the first year that Vermont is required to meet a series of emissions reduction targets outlined by the Global Warming Solutions Act. Is Vermont on track to meet the 2025 target? And what more needs to be done to reduce our emissions? So let's see, I think we left.
Skip healthcare?
Yes, I am taking the moderator privilege of kind of throwing you for a loop a little bit. Okay, I'm jumping in, watching our time, and yeah. So I believe actually, Taylor, though it's your turn to start first. So.
All right. Well, I'd say individuals should be doing everything within their financial means to provide future generations with the cleanest and most hospitable environment. However, I do view some of these measures, such as the Clean Heat Standard, as an assault on freedom of choice and a bit narrow-minded. I support the transition to clean energy, especially when someone has a failing heat system, If you've got an oil burner that's going down, replace it with some heat pumps. We should get the full use of any system that's been installed throughout its design life. The idea that the state would force higher fuel prices on Vermonters seems quite unfair. If the proposed credit system is enacted in some form, Vermonters who utilize fossil fuel systems for heat, an absolute necessity in a state that reaches sub-zero temperatures, could be facing dollar increases per gallon or more in order to meet emissions goals. Nobody should be forced to shoulder disproportionate financial burden when companies like Home Depot sell products that are basically designed to fail, products that have carbon associated with their production. I would be in favor of tackling emissions by looking in a broader sense at total CO2 production, such as emissions associated with manufacturing. I see a double win scenario if we focus on manufacturing. Enact design life mandates, and consumers could end up buying higher quality items that last longer and save as a result. This may be a more federal solution, but states do have the power to regulate commerce, and maybe we need to work with other states to impose stricter quality standards. I think that's a more fair means to meet emissions goals than by narrowly focusing on heating at the financial expense of Vermonters.
Thank you very much. Let's go next to Senator Ram Hinsdale.
So I think probably more than a year ago, one would consider climate change a young person's passion, given the life horizon that they have. But I think after our July floods of last year, our December floods of last year, and our July floods of this year, which represent 3 of the largest climate events in Vermont history, and then following that, Helene, Milton, the storms that we're seeing wreck and ravage the rest of the country, more people are talking about climate change from the perspective of what we can do to stop the atlas of human suffering that's been predicted and is coming true, and to adapt and save the most people and get them out of floodplains. That's work that I'm deeply passionate about, and I think where I come down, and I hope this doesn't sound too naive to my colleagues, because Senator Lyons wrote the book on this stuff, is in fact something that she helped champion, which is the efficiency utility that we have in the state. Once upon a time, we had a huge political battle to add a small surcharge on people's electricity bills that would be put into efficiency programs and holding people's hands through rebates and making their homes more efficient, making choices, and helping them build agency. And we've been so successful in that we have the most stable electric rates in New England. I hope we can do the same thing in a lot of other sectors. Take a small amount of money from everyone and invest it in those who need the help the most, to give them choice to leave their single occupancy vehicle or have a safe, warm home.
Okay, thank you. Senator Lyons.
Thank you, and thank you for the comment on Efficiency Vermont. Obviously, weatherization is a significant way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to achieve our targets. I think we can achieve our targets. Remember, we're talking about what our electric utilities can do and how we can consolidate into a distributed generation, renewable generation program, local generation that will help reduce greenhouse gases. Without that local distributed generation, we may run into the morass of needing very expensive transmission lines and others. So we're going to have to balance the need for transmission as well as for distribution in our state. But I do think we can achieve the 100% renewable by 2035, whether it's through contracts or other locally distributed solar panels, through heat pumps, through weatherization. And also remember that we did pass a Superfund bill this year, and I'm thinking of Dick Sears again, who is very much a strong proponent of that, where we are asking those who are the biggest polluters, our large fossil fuel generators, to pay into this fund in the state and help us get out of the severe weather complications that we face very soon. We've been talking about rain, we have wind, we have tornadoes, we have buyouts, we have people raising their homes. It's it is a challenge for all of us. I don't care how old you are, and I think we all understand that.
Great, thank you. Colonel Roy.
Thanks. Certainly our environment must be protected, and carbon emissions are part of that. A series of bills that were passed by overriding the governor are unreasonable, expensive, and impractical. Why do I say that? Well, Vermont already has the lowest carbon footprint in the United States. It's football season, so let me put this in perspective. Look at the emissions of the United States of America as the size of a football field. 300 feet, 100 yards. If you look at what the carbon emissions that are coming from Vermont in relationship to that football field, it's 4 inches. 4 inches of that is what Vermont is putting into the United States carbon emissions quota. If we do all these things that have been passed, including the carbon tax, the Affordable Heat Act, Global Warming Solutions Act, which we're now being sued on, it would take that 4 inches and move it all the way down to 3 inches. To the cost of what? $10 billion for the Affordable Heat Act, being sued on the Global Warming Solutions Act, and the Renewable Energy Standard, which is going to raise the utilities, electric prices 10%. Vermonters have always done the right thing, especially for the environment, and they will continue to do the same. We don't need to be smacked the side of the head with these kind of laws.
Thank you. Senator Chittenden.
So Vermont has a moral and existential imperative to do what we can to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm proud of many of our efforts and our track record addressing the climate crisis. But we need to do more. Based on recent information about the Affordable Heat Act that was just discussed, I will say, looking at those numbers, I do not support committing any more of our scarce resources to stand up an incredibly complex and unprecedented clean heat exchange. So similar to other comments, I think we need to look at other solutions, and I'm glad that there was this thing called the check back put into the bill so that the next legislature that you all elect will have to consider before that law takes effect, affecting heating prices in Vermont. We are just too small of a state to do what that contemplated alone. I do support using a market-sensitized tax on our heating fuels, similar to our gasoline tax, and using these revenues to directly subsidize the electrification of our heating systems and the weatherization of our homes, prioritizing the most vulnerable in the state. We need to commit more attention to adapting our infrastructure to this inevitably changing climate and to make us more resilient for generations to come. And I'm just to invoke the Lieutenant Governor again, I'm glad that on the campaign trail he's talking more about wind power. I think we need to consider all options. I'm not advocating for wind turbines on every mountainside in Vermont, but that is a clean energy source that could drive down costs of electricity in Vermont that we need to keep on the table if we're serious about addressing our climate crisis.
Thank you all very much for addressing that question. In the interest of time, I'm going to, I will turn to the very last question on our list, but I'm going to ask you to be a little bit more brief and give it only a 60-second answer. So for the folks at home, this is about the political temperature, something that is important at the national level, certainly, but also at the state and local levels. Political differences were front and center this biennium, with the governor vetoing a record number of bills passed by the legislature, and the legislature, in turn, overriding a record number of those vetoes. Talk about a time you worked across differences to accomplish something and how you might approach collaborating with colleagues you don't agree with. So we'll start with Senator Ram Hinsdale.
Thank you. I actually think about this question a lot, just given the state of our democracy at this point, but also because chairing economic development, I sit between the Republican minority leader, Senator Brock, and the Democratic majority leader, Senator Clarkson. They're both on my committee, and many chairs, really want to make sure everyone feels heard and respects the outcome of a bill passing our committee, even if they don't necessarily agree with it. And I'm actually proud that a vast majority, if not all of our bills, came out of Committee 5-0 this year. And that includes, to go to a specific example, some labor issues. And one of those being enshrining the right to organize a union and collectively bargain in our state constitution. And, Senator Brock wants information. He wants to hear from every witness and make sure we've heard from the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera. And when it came time to vote, I didn't actually know how he was going to vote. And he said, unions helped my grandfather, a black man, get his first stable job as an American and enter the middle class, and that helped our family. And I'm going to vote for this bill. And that was another unanimous bill out of our committee. So sometimes people don't realize that there's a lot of agreement in the legislature. It's sometimes masked by that end game with just a few bills where we disagree.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator Lyons.
Thank you. Absolutely, there is considerable agreement within committees and committee discussion. And I do think of the appropriations process and the budget, and that's a place that the governor actually applauded the work that we did on the budget and working with the administration. It's not an easy task. When we build a budget, you've got recommendations coming from policy committees, from advocates, from folks outside of the building, and having some cooperative effort is critically important. Having everyone in with diverse points of view, and then collaborating to build a final bill that folks can agree with. So this is second nature to me. I enjoy working with people, so it's difficult not to agree.
Great, thank you. Colonel Roy.
So in my background with IBM, one of the jobs I had was to negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts with multinational companies. And the only way you can do that is to have win-win situations. And I can't think of an instance where I wasn't able to do that, get to a point where it was good for both companies. Because only with win-win can it be a sustainable and successful relationship. I don't see that collaborative process happening in today's legislature. Because of supermajority status, the legislative majority does not have to negotiate or compromise or even listen to the governor or anyone else. Case in point, not a single Republican is on the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. This is the committee responsible for the deepest investigations and the testimonies, to hear the testimonies for the GWSA, the Affordable Heat Act, and Renewable Energy Standard, all passed with no contrary voting positions in the committee and by overriding the governor's veto. This lack of balance is stark, and I want to help change that.
Thank you. Let's move to Senator Chittenden.
As a rule, I listen to ideas from all people, regardless of party, and I've heard as many good ideas from Republicans as I have from progressives, as I have from Democrats. We're all Vermonters first and foremost, and we all want the best for Vermont. We just debate over on how to do that with limited information, uncertain futures, and scarce resources. But I will say, I'm worried that the temperature in the State House was getting to a place, the political rhetoric, that it hasn't been before when I talk to long-serving members. So we need to do better. And as much as we can blame so many things at the national level, I do fault some of the dialogue that's happening at the national level for seeping into Vermont culture. So I'm hopeful that the next legislature, if you all let me serve, or whoever is serving there, regardless if it's me or not, takes the time to really find common ground, work with everybody, and listen to everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Craven.
Thank you. Well, as the sole independent up here, I think that I would be well positioned to be able to speak with both sides. I share a lot of socially liberal views, but I'm definitely fiscally conservative. Coming from engineering, one of my biggest jobs working on major projects as in inspection is working with both parties and being a reasonable individual. Now, one thing I pride myself on is the fact that I've been well respected on those jobs. I'm not known as the unreasonable inspector. I understand that everybody needs to win, as Mr. Roy said. And when you have a win-win scenario, when projects get done efficiently and in a timely manner, and the contractor makes money as well, and the town is happy, that's really how you come out into a positive, outcome. And I think that, I would definitely bring that to the legislature, being able to be an independent, and hopefully, the supermajority isn't pushing their way through like they have been.
Thank you all so much. Thanks to our candidates. You've done a great job, and really appreciate all of your thoughtful responses. To those of you at home, I want to say thank you for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of local candidates, local budgets, and ballot items. You can find this and many more forums at cctv.org/general or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel. And don't forget to cast your ballot in the general election on or before November 5th. You should have already received your ballot in the mail. And then that night, tune in to Town Meeting TV's Results Recap Show. Contact your local clerk to find out how to obtain a ballot if you haven't received it in the mail, and to register to vote, which you can do the same day in Vermont. And thank you all for watching and sharing Town Meeting TV.